Before we dive into the misty secrets of the Isle of Skye, I need to ask you something vital. If you're here, you love a good thriller, and so do we. This is a brand new channel, and we're on a mission to hit our first 100 subscribers. Help us get there. Click that subscribe button right now, and if you enjoy this story, we'd love to see 50 likes on this video. Now, turn down the lights, grab out your blanket, and let's journey to Scotland. The helicopter landed with a deafening roar on the emerald green turf of the Isle of Skye, instantly muffling the perpetual sound of the waves breaking against the basalt cliffs. Stepping out, Clara pulled her thick wool coat tighter against the biting North Atlantic wind. A restorer specializing in the most fragile of ancient manuscripts, she had traveled halfway across the globe from the humid chaos of Rio de Janeiro to this place of stark, isolated beauty, to examine a document almost too delicate to touch, an 18th-century diary. The diary was the last known possession of Morwen MacGregor, a woman accused, though never convicted, of a brutal murder centuries ago, a case that had become a local myth, unsolved and haunting. The diary itself had only just been discovered, sealed within the wall of a collapsed fisherman's cottage, and was so brittle it felt like dried leaf matter. It was both Clara's greatest professional challenge and the reason she felt a deep, unsettling cold that had nothing to do with the Scottish weather. She was met not by an academic, but by a wall of granite and reserved silence. Detective Aidan McNeill stood waiting, his uniform blending into the grey sky, his eyes the same troubled blue-grey as the sea beyond. His jaw was tight, etched with the perpetual worry of a man wrestling with unfinished business. "Ms. Vasconcelos, welcome to Portree," he said, his voice a low, gravelly burr, the cadence of the island. "Just Clara, please, Detective McNeill. I'm here to save a piece of history. And I'm here to ensure it doesn't create more of it, Clara. Call me Aidan." Aidan explained his unexpected assignment on the drive to the remote library. The discovery of Morwen's diary coincided too neatly with a recent unnerving spike in disappearances across the island. Hikers who vanished on misty trails, fishermen who never returned. The local police chief, a man who understood the ominous undertones of Skye, saw a pattern that might link the past's unsolved murder to the present's ongoing fear. Aidan's own personal tragedy, the mysterious death of his younger sister 2 years prior, made him doubly vigilant. He carried the grief like a weight in his shoulders, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurked beneath Skye's romantic facade. Their first day was conducted in silence, thick with the smell of old paper and the quiet hum of Clara's specialized equipment. She worked meticulously, using micro-brushes and chemical vapor to stabilize the fragile pages. Aidan sat at the opposite end of the reading room, a silent sentinel, running his fingers over the polished wood of his coffee mug. As the sun dipped low, casting long, bruised shadows, Clara finally had to break the silence. "You don't seem thrilled with your babysitting duty, Detective." Aidan looked up, his gaze direct and piercing. "I don't like unsolved cases, Clara, and I don't like things that stir them up. The people who vanished, their families deserve answers. This diary, this myth, I need to know if it's an anchor or a ghost." Their professional proximity quickly frayed the edges of their reserve. Aidan found himself watching the rhythmic, intense focus in Clara's hands, the way she breathed in sync with her painstaking work. Clara was drawn to the protective tension in his body, the way his strong hands gripped the desk when he was thinking. Over dinner, away from the police station and the old papers, they spoke about everything but the island's secrets. They spoke of Rio's vibrant energy, the silence of the highlands, and the shared, deep-seated solitude that seemed to govern both their lives. The air between them thickened, charged with an undeniable electric pull. It was the kind of connection that felt reckless, born of shared isolation and the heavy presence of death. One evening, after a particularly frustrating session battling the stubborn ink and the damp air of the manuscript, Aidan found Clara standing on the library's stone balcony, looking out at the tumultuous sea. "The fog makes it feel like we're the only 2 people left in the world," she murmured, shivering. Aidan moved toward her, slowly, deliberately. He stood so close that she could feel the heat radiating from him, smell the clean scent of the island's moss and wool on his jacket. It was a dangerous proximity, a silent acknowledgement of the attraction they had both been fighting. "We are not," he whispered, his voice dangerously low. He reached out and gently smoothed a stray curl of her hair back from her cheek, his thumb grazing her skin. The simple touch sent a jolt, sharp and visceral, through her body. Their eyes locked, and the unspoken language of desire flared between them. It was more than a simple attraction. It was the magnetic pull between two people who felt profoundly damaged, recognizing in the other a kindred darkness. Aidan leaned in, his intent clear, his gaze dropping to her lips. "Don't." The word screamed in his mind. He was a man steeped in danger and unresolved grief. His sister's death had taught him that love was a vulnerability the darkness exploited. He pulled back just barely, his breath hitching. This isn't smart, Clara," he said, his voice raw. Clara's own secret, her hidden agenda, flared up, making her heart pound harder than the fear of his rejection. She looked away, towards the swirling mist. "No, it's not." A handwritten letter, anonymously sent, was tucked inside her restoration kit. It contained only 2 sentences. "Morwen McGregor's diary holds the truth. It will reveal how your mother died." Clara's mother hadn't been killed on Skye, but in a tragic decades-old accident back in Brazil, or so she thought. Now her life's work was suddenly twisted into a personal hunt for a truth that might destroy her family history. She was desperate for Aidan, yet terrified he would find out she wasn't just a restorer, but a seeker of vengeance. Aidan, meanwhile, knew he had to keep Clara at arm's length. He was convinced that the disappearances and his sister's death were connected, and the closer he let Clara get, the more vulnerable she became to the danger pursuing him. His life was a trap, and he couldn't bear to drag her into it. That intense, brief moment of sensual release, the potential surrender in her eyes, only intensified his resolve to protect her by keeping her away. The romance was forbidden not by oath, but by the threat of violence that shadowed his every step. The forced distance lasted barely a week before the past brutally clawed its way into the present. The body was discovered by a hiker on a remote black sand beach near the Quiraing. It was a local man, a fisherman. But it wasn't the death itself that stunned the island. It was the staging. The victim was laid out on a bed of kelp, arms crossed over his chest, his mouth slightly open, a single smooth black stone placed precisely in his palm. Aidan's hands trembled as he drove back to the library later that night, the image seared into his memory. He pulled the fragile, translated pages of Morwen McGregor's diary from Clara's vault. The pages detailing the 18th century murder described the victim, a wealthy landowner, found on the shore. He was arranged with unnatural care, the sea a shroud, and a single black stone, the color of basalt, placed as a final cruel marker of his quiet demise. The killer wasn't just inspired by the diary. They were recreating the scene page by page, death by death. The cold realization settled over Aidan. The centuries-old diary was the killer's playbook. Clara redoubled her efforts. The pressure from the police was immense, but the personal stakes for her were even higher. The anonymous letter flashed in her mind. "It will reveal how your mother died." She focused on Morwen's looping, old-fashioned script, searching for any break in the narrative. As she transcribed the central portion of the diary, the week leading up to Morwen's arrest, Clara began to notice an anomaly. The narrative seemed disjointed, the words too carefully chosen, the ink slightly different in certain passages. She began comparing ink composition and paper fibers, a tedious, painstaking process that required her to work until dawn, fueled by bad coffee and pure adrenaline. Then she found it, a double layer of script. Using UV light and chemical reagents, she uncovered messages hidden beneath Morwen's main narrative, written in a finer hand. A coded language of symbols and shorthand only visible through restoration science. The messages spoke not of murder, but of betrayal. "They plan to silence me," one read. "The circle will condemn the innocent to protect their line." Morwen McGregor hadn't been a killer. She had been the intended victim of a conspiracy, and she had hidden her defense within her own diary. Aidan, meanwhile, had been digging into the history of the island's missing. He found a common thread. All were related to families who owned land that had passed through the centuries via secret, unregistered transfers. More chillingly, he found a recurring symbol carved crudely near the site of his sister's death, and now, near the fisherman's corpse, a serpent coiled around a thistle. He recognized it from old texts, the mark of the Comlandion and Eilein, the Island Protection Covenant, a small, secretive society of land-owning families from the 18th century, ostensibly dedicated to preserving Skye's heritage, but in reality focused on consolidating power and preventing outsiders from interfering. The killer was operating under the guise of an ancient malicious legacy. Their shared work brought them closer than any forced intimacy ever could. They communicated in hurried whispers over fragile ancient secrets, the tension between the fear of the killer and the heat of their attraction becoming almost unbearable. One afternoon, standing over the workbench, discussing the serpent symbol and the coded text, Aidan leaned over Clara to point out a micro-scratch on the paper. His chest brushed her back, his breath warm on her neck. It was a fleeting, accidental touch, but it detonated the dam of their suppressed desire. The urgency of the case, the looming threat, seemed to demand a counterforce of raw human connection. Aidan turned, his fingers cupping her face, his thumb moving sensuously over her jaw. The world outside the dimly lit room vanished. He didn't pull away this time. His mouth found hers, a kiss, desperate, deep, and laced with the salt of his fear and her adrenaline. It was a hungry, consuming embrace, an exchange of all the secrets they couldn't voice. Their bodies fit together with a precision that was terrifyingly perfect. He reached up, blindly pulling the pins from her hair, letting the dark silk fall around them. Clara moved into him, her hands seeking the solid, muscled strength beneath his shirt. She knew this was dangerous, reckless, but the sheer relief of his touch, the sensual release of the prolonged tension, was overwhelming. In the silent language of their bodies, they admitted their fear and their need to anchor themselves to something real before the phantom killer stole their chance. It was a moment of profound, shared vulnerability, a desperate plea for light in the face of suffocating darkness. They broke apart, breathless, the coded diary pages scattered around them. The line had been crossed, the secret shared, not of the letters or the sister, but of the absolute, consuming desire. They knew the risk, but the truth, the core of their relationship, was now as binding as the ancient covenant they were hunting. The historian, Dr. Alistair MacLeod, was a fixture on Skye. Charismatic, with a shock of silver hair and an easy, affable manner, he hosted a popular local history podcast and seemed to materialize whenever Clara made a breakthrough. He brought her tea, commented knowledgeably on the 18th century dialect, and expressed an unnerving interest in the exact content of her translations. Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating, Clara, he'd beam, leaning over her shoulder, smelling faintly of tweed and peat smoke. That passage about the black stone, truly poetic, and the suggestion of a conspiracy, it changes everything we thought we knew about Morwen. How did you manage to decipher that so quickly? His knowledge of the diary's content was the first cold alarm bell. Aidan had only shared the staging of the murder scene with the chief and a handful of senior officers. MacLeod knew the key descriptive details, the poetry of the black stone. He claimed to have heard murmurs, local gossip. But then, during a late-night discussion, MacLeod casually mentioned the Island Protection Covenant symbol, describing the serpent and thistle in detail, even before Aidan officially briefed Clara on his findings. An old legend, of course, he dismissed with a wave of his hand. The founding families protecting their secrets, just like the secrets Morwen must have kept. Clara watched him go, the charming smile suddenly seeming predatory. He was too smooth, too interested, and knew too many details that should never have left the police station. The pieces slammed together with terrifying clarity one rainy afternoon. Clara was reviewing the final coded entries, translated now, which detailed the names of the men who framed Morwen. They were the original members of the Comlandion and Eilein. The names were famous, powerful, the ancestors of the island's most established families. The last name on Morwen's list, the man she blamed most bitterly, Thomas MacLeod. Clara snatched up the newspaper clipping detailing the latest murder. The killer was not just recreating the murder, but completing a cycle. MacLeod, Dr. Alistair MacLeod. As she ran to find Aidan, she passed MacLeod in the corridor. He was not smiling. His eyes were cold, and he held a sheaf of papers, copies of her initial translations, in his hand. "Looking for Aiden?" MacLeod's voice was utterly devoid of its usual charm. "He's gone to look for me, actually. We have a lot in common, you and I. We both seek the truth, but for very different ends." Clara backed away, her heart hammering. "You're descending from them, the framers, a descendant of the founders," he corrected, his voice a low hiss. "They were right to protect the island's legacy. Morwen McGregor's diary was a threat then, and your translation is a threat now. You see, Morwen's document proved they conspired to kill one of their own and blame her. She was the one protecting the island, not them. My ancestors silenced the truth once. I intend to close the cycle." "The disappearances," Clara whispered. "Loose ends. People who got too close. People who owned land that should never have left the original families. But you, Clara, you're the key. The one who will publish the proof. You must be stopped." Before she could scream, MacLeod seized her, crushing a cloth soaked in something acrid over her mouth. The world spun into blackness. She awoke to the biting cold and the deafening sound of wind. She was tied, wrists bound with rough rope, kneeling on wet, stony ground. The thick, rolling fog of Skye had descended, rendering the world monochrome. She could just make out the vertiginous drop of a famous cliff edge nearby. The air smelled of salt and fear. MacLeod stood before her, the silver hair shining in the weak, diffused light. He was holding a small silver-handled knife, the same kind of surgical instrument Clara used for restoration. Fitting, isn't it? The restorer undone by the very tools of her trade. "Aiden will find you," Clara said, her voice shaking but firm. "Aiden is predictable. He's looking for me. He never sees the bigger picture, just like his poor sister." The name of his sister was a cold blade to Clara's heart, even as she heard the sound of heavy boots crunching on the wet stone behind MacLeod. Aiden emerged from the fog like a ghost, his gun already drawn. "MacLeod! Drop it now!" MacLeod laughed, a manic, high-pitched sound that the wind tried to tear away. "You found me? Good. I wanted you to be here for the grand finale, Detective. The truth is always so much more satisfying when you're there to witness its demise. It ends now, Alistair. You have no legacy to protect, just a chain of murders." "Oh, but I do. I protect the MacLeod name. And I'm not just closing Morwen's cycle. I killed your sister, Aiden. Did you think a simple accident could cover up the fact that she was asking too many questions about the old land deeds? She got too close to the Covenant's original charter. I told her I had to protect the legacy. It was quite poetic, actually. She fought bravely, just like you're about to." Aiden's face drained of color, his grief and rage combining into a terrifying, animalistic snarl. He lunged forward. MacLeod, quick and practiced, shoved Clara hard toward the cliff edge, then turned to meet Aiden's charge. The gun skittered across the stones as Aiden tackled the historian, sending the two men wrestling dangerously close to the drop. Clara, half-conscious and fighting the ropes, screamed her warning as MacLeod gained the upper hand, his knife glinting. "The knife, Aiden." "The knife!" Aiden twisted, the shock of his sister's murder giving him a surge of reckless strength. He managed to disarm MacLeod, kicking the silver knife into the thick heather. The fight became a brutal, primal grappling. Finally, Aiden delivered a punishing blow that sent the historian staggering back. MacLeod, blinded by the fog and his own defeat, stumbled on the slick rock, tipping back over the precipice with a terrifying, muffled shriek that was swallowed instantly by the sea. Aiden didn't watch him fall. He scrambled to Clara, cutting her bonds, pulling her away from the edge just as a loose rock gave way beneath her foot. She collapsed against his chest, shaking violently, the adrenaline finally giving way to bone-deep fear. He held her tight, his uniform now soaked with her tears and his sweat. The world was still obscured by fog, but the darkness had been defeated. Clara barely survived. The fall and the exposure left her hospitalized for weeks, fighting a brutal respiratory infection. Aiden was there every day, his granite demeanor softening only when she slept. The finality of MacLeod's confession, though horrific, finally allowed Aiden to grieve his sister properly. The ghost was exorcised. When Clara was finally well enough to sit up, Aiden brought her a small leather-bound volume. It was the restored Morwen McGregor diary, pages finally stable, its coded messages clear and damning. The diary didn't just reveal a centuries-old conspiracy, it contained the truth about her mother's supposed accident. Morwen's coded message included details of a mainland operation run by the Covenant to silence threats, one involving a tragic fire disguised as a fault, an operation that matched the exact date and location of Clara's mother's death decades ago. MacLeod's ancestors had a long reach. "It's not sweet, not yet," Clara murmured, running a hand over the page that revealed the full truth. "No," Aidan agreed, sitting beside her, taking her hand. His thumb traced the fragile bones of her wrist. "But we're here. We are alive. We still have the last secrets of this book to unravel and a life to build from scratch. They took our pasts, Clara, but they won't take our future." They decided to leave the isolation of Skye temporarily, using the diary's final pages, the names of the remaining Covenant members, as their map. They would track down the truth about Clara's mother and Aidan's sister, using the information they had risked everything to retrieve. They would do it together, fueled by the memory of the secrets they had shared in the flickering light of the reading room, the desperate, sensual fire that had burned through the fear. The end was bittersweet, yes, marked by loss and the long road of justice ahead. But it was anchored by a love forged in the thickest of fogs, a connection born of shared trauma and unwavering courage. They would rebuild their lives side by side, detectives of their own histories ready for whatever the next chapter or the next island might bring.